are moments at Fairmont Crest when silence speaks louder than words, when the air itself seems to tremble with secrets too heavy to contain. Behind the manicured lawns and polished marble halls lies a world where every smile is a weapon and every act of kindness hides a cost. It was in this fragile space, between trust and temptation, between love and betrayal, that Dani, Bill, and Hayley found themselves bound together by choices none of them could undo. What began as an innocent closeness born from shared pain soon grew into a storm of resentment and desire, tearing apart everything they thought they understood about loyalty. The golden gates that once symbolized protection now trapped them inside their own mistakes, where guilt took root, anger bloomed, and forgiveness was no longer an option. Fairmont Crest was no longer just a home, it had become a stage for ruin, and each of them, Dani, Bill, and Hayley, would soon learn that once you cross the line between love and vengeance, there is no way back. The afternoon light at Fairmont Crest bled through the tall glass windows, gilding the air with a kind of deceptive serenity that could not mask the growing turbulence within its walls. The Dupree estate had seen its share of secrets, but never had it felt so charged, so full of quiet danger, as when Dani lingered in that forbidden moment with Bill. What began as a mere closeness born of shared history and pain slowly turned into something that neither of them could name aloud. The kind of gravity that pulls two people toward disaster while convincing them it is comfort. Dani had convinced herself that she was strong enough to resist it, that her marriage to Andre was solid, that what Bill stirred in her was nostalgia, not temptation. But the truth beneath her restraint was something she refused to face. She wanted to be seen, not as the perfect Dupree daughter, not as Andre's dutiful wife, but as a woman who still had the power to make a man lose control. Bill, meanwhile, was a man drowning in the weight of his own mistakes. His marriage to Hayley had become a battlefield, a place where affection had been replaced by the cold precision of blame. He told himself that Dani was just a distraction, a fleeting spark in a life that had gone dim. Yet when she laughed softly, when she touched his arm to comfort him, he felt the slow return of a heartbeat he thought long dead. What he didn't know, or refused to admit, was that every glance, every near touch was a betrayal that Hayley could feel even when she wasn't in the room. She had always been attuned to him, sensitive to the smallest shifts in his mood. And when she walked into that room, when her eyes fell upon Bill and Dani, standing too close, breathing the same charged air, she felt something in her chest collapse. Not just jealousy, but the hollow realization that her fears had finally taken shape. Hayley's reaction was not born from insecurity but from exhaustion. She had spent years fighting for a love that demanded silence in the face of disrespect. She had endured Bill's absences, his excuses, his emotional withdrawal. Yet to see him with Dani, her closest friend, was a cruelty she could not rationalize away. Her voice cracked the air like a whip, but beneath the fury was heartbreak so deep it was almost physical. The betrayal struck her twice, once as a wife and again as a friend. The image of Dani's hand resting on Bill's arm burned into her mind, and no amount of denial could erase it. Her anger, sharp and unrelenting, turned toward the one person she thought would never wound her. Dani stood frozen, her face pale under the sunlight that once made her glow. Guilt crept over her like a shadow, but pride refused to let her crumble. She wanted to explain, to insist that nothing happened, yet deep inside she knew that the moment Hayley walked in, the truth didn't matter anymore. It was not about what she did but what she allowed herself to feel. And that emotion, the longing, the heat, the subtle defiance, was something Hayley recognized instantly. Fairmont Crest had always been a stage for appearances, a place where every smile hid calculation, every gesture concealed pain. But now, the mask had slipped, and the women who once laughed over wine now stood as enemies divided by a man neither of them truly trusted. Bill tried to intervene, but his voice carried no authority anymore. In that instant, he saw the reflection of all his failures, not just as a husband but as a man who had turned love into collateral damage. He had thought he could manage his guilt, keep both women from seeing how lost he truly was. But Hayley's tears were not the dramatic outburst of a jealous wife, they were the breaking point of a woman who had sacrificed too much. Her fury came from love poisoned by neglect, and it tore through the room like a storm that refused to end. Dani's silence only made it worse. Her composure, her attempt at calm, looked like arrogance to Hayley, as if she was too proud to show remorse. When Hayley stormed out, she left behind not just noise but an atmosphere that seemed to crack the foundation of Fairmont Crest itself. Dani collapsed onto the couch, trembling, realizing that what had happened was irreversible. The walls that once sheltered her from judgment now felt suffocating. Every choice she had made, from marrying Andre to rekindling her bond with Bill, suddenly seemed like a chain around her neck. She thought about Andre's faith in her, the way he had defended her against whispers that she still harbored feelings for her ex-husband. And now, the very sin she denied had taken shape before her eyes. The realization cut deep, leaving her stranded between two men who represented two opposing forms of self-destruction. Andre, although absent, haunted her thoughts. His possessive affection had always been both her comfort and her prison. He had rescued her when her life was falling apart, but his control disguised itself as care. He would not forgive easily, not because of love, but because betrayal wounded his pride. Dani knew that once the story reached him, it would not remain a private misunderstanding. Andre would turn it into a spectacle, a declaration of war masked as moral righteousness. And that fear began to grow in her chest, mingling with shame and defiance until she could barely breathe. Meanwhile, Hayley's anger did not fade when she left the estate. It transformed into a relentless storm within her. She drove aimlessly through the quiet streets of Fairmont Crest, replaying every moment she had trusted Dani, every time Bill had sworn he was loyal. Her pain became her compass, guiding her not toward healing but toward revenge. By the time she stopped the car, she was no longer crying. Her heart had gone cold, her mind sharp with the precision of someone who had decided she would not be the victim anymore. She knew how to wound both of them, Dani's reputation and Bill's peace, and she would do it without hesitation. The following days at Fairmont Crest were suffocating. Rumors spread quickly, and whispers about Dani and Bill's moment began to circulate through the inner circles of the community. Anita tried to protect her daughter's name, but the Dupree reputation had already taken a hit. Bill avoided public appearances, his silence interpreted as guilt. Hayley, on the other hand, became the center of sympathy, the wronged wife, the woman who had been betrayed by both her husband and her friend. But what no one saw was the quiet unraveling of all three of them. Dani couldn't sleep, haunted by memories that weren't even sins but still felt unforgivable. Bill's guilt festered, turning him inward, desperate to explain what could no longer be undone. And Hayley, beneath her poised exterior, began to lose herself to bitterness, finding comfort only in the idea that she could make them both suffer as she did. Andre returned sooner than expected. His trip had been cut short by a call from someone who had seen the scandal unfold. His calmness upon arrival frightened Dani more than any outburst could. He didn't need to yell, his silence carried judgment sharper than any insult. The Dupree estate, once alive with laughter, became a tomb of unspoken resentment. Dani tried to reach him, but he kept his distance, watching her with the calculating detachment of a man deciding whether his wife was still an asset or a liability. Bill, sensing that Andre's anger could become dangerous, tried to reason with him, but that only deepened the tension. For Andre, Bill was not just a rival, he was the embodiment of every threat he had fought to keep outside his marriage. In the days that followed, the emotional damage took physical form. Hayley fell ill from exhaustion, her anger eating away at her health. Dani began to lose control over her composure, showing cracks even in public events. Bill withdrew completely, his business dealings slipping through his hands as he tried to navigate the chaos he had caused. Each of them clung to the illusion that they could still fix what was broken, but Fairmont Crest had its own way of punishing those who believed in redemption. Secrets never stayed buried long here, and every betrayal fed into the next. When news broke that Hayley had filed for separation, Dani's world finally collapsed. Andre saw it as confirmation that his wife had humiliated him, and his vengeance took on a quieter, more deliberate form. He began removing her influence from his business and isolating her socially, all while maintaining the image of a devoted husband. Dani, realizing she had been reduced to a pawn in her own marriage, felt a dark sense of clarity. Her choices had led her here, every unspoken desire, every reckless impulse, every lie she told herself to justify her loneliness. Hayley's revenge reached its peak when she leaked private photos of Dani and Bill together, innocent but suggestive enough to destroy trust. The media twisted the story, turning Dani into a scandal and Bill into a fool. Andre didn't need to say a word, his silence spoke of triumph and contempt. Dani finally understood that there was no forgiveness left to seek, not from Hayley, not from Bill, and certainly not from herself. Fairmont Crest had always been a place of facades, but now the truth was laid bare. Love, when tainted by pride and deceit, becomes indistinguishable from ruin. And as night fell over the mansion, Dani stood by the window, watching the distant lights flicker over the gates that once symbolized safety. Behind her, every room carried the echo of broken promises. She realized then that the anger that started with Hayley's scream had spread through all of them, consuming not just their relationships but their very sense of self. What remained was not forgiveness or understanding, only the bitter satisfaction of knowing that once love turns into war, there are no victors, only survivors pretending they are whole. And when the dawn finally broke over Fairmont Crest, it brought no peace, only the quiet aftermath of destruction. The estate stood immaculate, yet beneath its elegance lay the wreckage of 3 lives forever changed. Dani no longer looked toward the future but merely endured each hour, her once bright spirit dimmed by guilt she could not wash away. Bill had vanished into his own silence, a man haunted by what he wanted and what it had cost him. Hayley, though victorious in appearance, felt no satisfaction. Revenge had filled the space where love used to live, leaving her empty and restless. The Dupree gates remained closed, guarding the ghosts of a story that could never be undone. In the stillness of that morning, the truth settled like ash. No one at Fairmont Crest had won, because every heart that sought justice had already been destroyed by its own fury.